Welcome to FCPS All-Stars. We are fortunate to have with us today Eileen McGrath, Pam Miller, Karina Nobis, and Kristen Spear of the Community Agency School Services Program, also known as CASS. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
I have a few questions for you that people may not know about CASS. The first thing I would like to know is, what would you like the community, the teachers, and everyone to know about the CASS program?
That's a great question, Tiana. There's so much that I could tell you about the history of CASS, but I know that we can't sit here all day and talk about it. So I'll try to sum it up for you. The CASS program was started in 1992 when then Associate Superintendent David Marco secured a grant from the Carnegie Foundation to hire a social worker to do a couple of things. One was to make sure that families were not facing barriers to services, to accessing services in the community. And the second one was to make sure that the various community agencies were not duplicating one another's services. So the interagency board got together and hired a social worker to start the program in Brunswick. She was located in a community-based building, and she was able to build a variety of services available to families right there in the Brunswick area. Eventually, there was a CASS coordinator hired to serve every feeder area in all of Frederick County. Currently, there are 4 CASS coordinators, the 4 of us here today, and we provide direct services to students in the middle schools. At the elementary and high school levels, we also provide consultation services to school staff to make sure that they can get necessary resource information to families. In August of 2015, we held our largest school supply distribution to date, and over 2,100 students received school supplies countywide.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, what would you all like schools to know about what CASS has to offer?
I think the most important thing for our schools to know is that we are here as a resource, whether to provide direct services to our families with students in the middle school, or to provide consultation to our families with children in elementary and high school. School staff can access us at any time by calling us or emailing us, and we're more than happy to provide information and to brainstorm solutions to what some of our families experiences as very challenging problems. Each summer, the CASS coordinators spend a great deal of time working on what we call our community resource guide. And that is what I like to think of as a quick and dirty guide, mainly geared for school staff, but parents are welcome to use it as well, with different categories of services that parents might need. It's an easy way for school staff to look in the index, find out what topic or what situation a family is facing, go to that area of the guide, and find the resources that will most directly benefit the family at that time.
Okay, that's really neat. Eileen, what is your background in, and what made you get started in this line of work?
Wow, well, what made me get started is kind of ancient history, since I've been a social worker for about 37 years.
Well, we're a school system. We like history.
Exactly. So I guess I'd have to go maybe back as far as high school. I think it was probably in high school when I kind of recognized that I was one of those kids that other kids would tell their problems to. And I don't know that I made a connection to social work until I went off to college. In high school, I thought, well, I just had a knack for making people feel comfortable. Went off to college, had a great couple of years, and realized I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Join the club.
So like a lot of other students back in the early 70s, I decided to take a year off, and I backpacked through Europe with my sister.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was really cool. But of course, that was back when you could do it on the cheap. And our money lasted about 5 months. But anyways, we stayed in youth hostels. And of course, the beauty of staying in youth hostels is that you meet people from all over the world. And so you would start to travel with these people from place to place. And before I knew it, I had total strangers kind of telling me their life story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And my sister would tease me and say, what is it about you? Why do people open up to you about their problems? So I came back, knew I needed to major in something, and I started to think about, maybe this knack that I have for making people feel comfortable, maybe it's a skill set. And so I looked into what we called back then the helping professions. And the one area that I was most drawn to was social work. And I think the reason I was drawn to it is that there's so many different things you can do with a social work degree. And so I got my bachelor's, worked in a group home for emotionally troubled girls for a year. Just thought I wanted to do family therapy, so I went and got my master's degree. Did some counseling with families, and then, with internships, I ended up in a battered women's shelter. And what I found there is that I really thought my real passion was advocacy and helping people. Took a lot of battered women through the court system and tried to help them follow that system. And that's kind of my passion. I ended up on the East Coast because my husband had a job, and I was going to go to law school. And but there was an advertisement for a job in a prosecutor's office looking for a social worker. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a cool combo. And this prosecutor was looking to start a crime victim witness program. So I jumped into that, was lucky enough to get that job, and kind of have found that advocacy and crisis intervention is probably my best suit. And I've been with FCPS for 21 years. Great job, very interesting. Never a
We
dull
are glad
moment.
to have your skills and expertise.
Thanks.
Yes. How about you, Kristen?
Well, Tiana, my story is a little bit different than Eileen's in that my story started out with a tragedy. When I was 6 years old, I was playing outside in a friend's front yard, and her father had a heart attack, sudden heart attack.
In front of you?
Yes, and died on the front lawn as the paramedics were
Oh my
arriving.
gosh.
It was pretty traumatic. And then for the many years that ensued, it was a family with 5 children. The mother was left to raise them. And of course, again, as Eileen was saying, it was the 70s at a time when many women didn't work outside the home. So she was left on her own to raise those 5 children without a husband. And it became obvious to me, even as a child, that if you ended up in that situation, there wasn't a lot of help to be had. And I watched them struggle for all the years that we all continued to live on that same street. I'm actually still friends with 2 of the girls in
Really?
the family to date, but it was eye-opening for me as a child. And my parents would talk about it and the fact that they needed help and there wasn't help, and my family and other families did what we could to help out. And as a teenager, I shared my clothes with them and I shared what I had with them. So that was an interesting part of the experience. The other interesting, kind of funny part of the experience was my mother often shopped at a grocery store when I was growing up that was across the street from a child guidance clinic. And the sign on the front lawn of the child guidance clinic had sort of some stick figure drawings of children playing and the words, community child guidance clinic. And I said to my mother at about that same age, about 6, I said, "Oh, Mom, what is that?" And she said, "Oh, that's a place where kids go to get help." And she explained a little bit about it. And I said, "Well, I want to work there when I grow up." The first job I got right out of graduate school was back at that child guidance clinic in my hometown.
Wow. That's fantastic. Pam, how about you? What made you decide to get into the helping profession?
Well, reflecting back, I would say I grew up in a family with many challenges. And when I was growing up, we didn't really share those challenges in the school setting or with friends. You just kind of dealt with them. And I always thought it would be really neat at some point to be able to support people and to be able to give people permission to share their story and to find supports. And I was always drawn, I was very compassionate to other people with personal stories happening that were tragic or sad or whatever. And I hadn't given it much thought, so I was kind of just led toward being compassionate to people. I went off to college, again, kind of similar to Eileen. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Started taking classes, general ed classes, and realized in my junior year that I needed to declare a major. And I kind of looked at my classes and said, you know what, I'm tending to take a lot of psychology classes and sociology classes. And so for me, it was kind of as simple as that. From there, I went on, of course, to get my master's degree in social work and have worked in group homes, residential treatment centers, psychiatric hospitals, and I ultimately thought private practice was where I wanted to end up, and I did end up in private practice. For me, I had a hard time sitting all day in one place, and so there was this ad for Frederick County Public Schools for the CASS program, which I had not been familiar with, and I applied for it, and that was 21 years ago, and it's a job I absolutely love because there's so many diverse areas of supporting people on the teacher level, student level, parent level. It's been a great experience, and each day I wake up and I come in and There's not a similar blueprint to Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday. You walk in and you think your day's going to be one thing, and you end up getting a variety of calls. So it's been a great fit for me.
It sounds like it. Now, Karina, it's your turn.
I guess I had a vague interest in human services when I was back in high school. I always had a large amount of compassion for other people. And whenever I was with somebody who was having a problem, I always just wanted to make it better.
You're a fixer.
Yeah, although I didn't
sort
know
of
it at
way.
the time. I was often described by other people as a good listener. So I had no idea that I was this budding social worker. In fact, I really had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. When I was in high school, I was interested in business administration, interior design, marketing. I always, when people ask me where I saw myself in the future, I envisioned myself in some large metropolitan city with this great office on like the 50th floor. I thought I was going to be successful in business. I entered college similar to Pam, taking general studies. I took classes ranging from business to photography, and then this sort of random class that I signed up for called social problems. And that class really piqued my interest, and so I started to take more and more sort of human services types classes, and I just really enjoyed it. It was really interesting to me, and I ended up declaring my major as sociology with a minor in criminology, and graduated with my Bachelor of Arts degree. Went straight to work. My first job was working with adults with developmental disabilities, and that was really great and a really wonderful experience. But back in college, when I was working on my bachelor's, I had mentored troubled youth. And these kids really taught me a lot. They came from some really sad family situations, and it was just really satisfying to me to be able to spend time with them and allow them to be a kid and just have some fun despite what they were facing. So I think that sort of, I probably didn't know it at the time, but that probably sparked my interest in specifically working with children and families. So although I loved working with adults with developmental disabilities, an opportunity came along for me to go work with troubled youth in a residential treatment center. And it was there that I fell in love with working with children and families. I decided while I was working that I would start pursuing my master's in social work, and eventually earned that degree after about 7 years of working in that setting, which is really challenging. I decided to try to get into the public school system and practice social work there.
Okay.
And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And this is probably my 10th year as a public school social worker, specifically my 4th year with Frederick County Public Schools.
The great thing about college is that by trial and error, we often tend to fall into where we're supposed to be. If you had never tried those other things, like sociology and, law and all of those other things, you would not have found your niche. And it's so amazing that college offers those opportunities, and we don't see them as that when we're in the mid-level. We think more credits we have to pay for. But what you're really doing is you're really fine-tuning your life skills and figuring out where you're supposed to be. So that was the common thread, and that's awesome to hear with all of you. Now, Pam, I'm curious to know about how many students does the CASS program serve?
Well, last year we served about 360 students. It breaks down to about 360 students among the 4 of us.
Okay.
For last year, we work with approximately 17 schools, give or take each. And that comprises of elementary, middle, and high school. We consult at the elementary and high school level with the staff so that they can share the resource information with their families. And at the middle school, we actually work with the families and their students. So if the kids are struggling in any way, our role is to help kids come to school prepared to learn. And so sometimes that means basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter. We kind of use this little cartoon about a student carrying all this luggage, and on each piece of the luggage it says homeless and hunger, and so if they're coming to school and they're not able to focus on learning, they're more worried about their tummy grumbling or where they're going to sleep at night. That's where we can step in. It also could mean tutoring. It could mean health insurance if the kids are sick. So it can mean a variety of things when we say we're working with approximately a caseload of 75 to 90 kids per CASS coordinator.
That's a lot. That's a lot. I know that you all are in the helping profession, and with that comes a lot of reward, but some of your days have to be hard. So what is it that makes for a hard day's work?
There are hard days, that's for sure. And I think if you asked the four of us what a hard day is, you'd probably get 4 different answers. But I think one scenario that I can paint, we probably all can relate to. It's that maybe that day where you go in and you find yourself sitting in a living room or at a kitchen table with a parent, maybe a mom, maybe a dad, maybe both. And they might have a child or 2 or 3, some of whom are struggling. But then they start to tell you, which is often a very heartbreaking story about maybe foreclosure that's looming, or illness that they haven't been able to afford their medical bills. It might be substance abuse. It might be domestic violence. There are so many issues, like Pam talked about, that are confronting families today. And
Right.
I think in the 21 years that we've been here, I think the pressures on families today have grown enormously. Not just economic, but in many other ways. So when you're sitting at that table and they're telling you these things, and some of the families have multiple issues going on, you realize that despite all your training and your years of experience and the fact that Frederick County has a lot of good programs, you're not going to be able to solve all those problems. And that is the reality of it. But as we say in Social Work 101, you start where the client is. And our job really is to build a relationship with that parent, make them partners in the common goal that we have in making their kids successful at school. Because as Pam said, if a lot of that stuff is going on at home, it's going to be difficult for that child to come to school. And we do it by building relationships. We build trust, we build relationships, and we try to get that family to be a partner with us in making their kids successful.
Relationships are really important.
Really important, and that's really kind of what you learn in social work, and it's really very important to the work that we do with our families, I think.
Now, I've heard something about a crisis team.
Yes.
Can one of you tell me what that is?
Sure. Frederick County Public Schools has put together a crisis team. It comprises of pupil personnel workers, school psychologists, school administrators, representatives from the central office here, and the CASS coordinators, as well as school counselors. And unfortunately, the crisis team is pulled together when something sad or tragic has happened in a school community. It could be a death of someone, a teacher, a student. It could be a frightening event. 9/11 was a trigger for the crisis team coming together. So it can be a small, very sad event of a loss of a life, or something very frightening and tragic happening larger in the world where we're pulled in to support the staff. And each school, does a beautiful job. We're able to bring our skill set because we're master's level social workers to, that group that comes together to support everyone involved. And sometimes it includes the parents coming in, or extended staff like bus drivers can come in depending on what the situations are. So we're very honored to be part of that process. It's very hard, and when you're talking about what a hard day is,
yes.
Those are very hard days, and it's very important for those crisis team folks to also provide support for each other following the crisis team events, just so we can process and debrief and look at how we can do a better job to support our community and our students.
We often say that that's one of those hard days that is coming when you get a phone call from either Ann Hammond or Janet Shipman. They have the very difficult job of calling people in advance. We have a crisis number list so they can reach us on a Saturday or a Sunday, and when you see that it's from one of them, it's sad because you know that something bad has happened. But it's really great to be able to come together with that team and to help kids be able to process that loss and to move on. I think the school system does a good job of making sure we've got that support.
That's great. That's great. Now, in spite of all the hard things that you deal with, what is it that makes you stay? What is it that makes your job worthwhile?
That's really easy. Out of all these questions, seeing a family shift from whatever they're facing, or their student, if they're struggling with something, and just seeing you can sit down with them and create a plan, or whatever it is that they need, and to see them choose to make those changes and make change in their life. That's really exciting, but sometimes it's not always that direct that you see the immediate change. Sometimes you provide a service and you're not quite sure it ever really helped them. I could give an example. I had a couple kids that were not always embracing our ideas that we would give them. and sometimes parents too. You just can't always read them, but their body language and for whatever reason. But you might run into them at another point. And I ran into this one boy who I had seen him in middle school and early high school years. I ran into him in a parking lot as a young adult, and he pulled me to the side and he said, "I just needed to let you know that although I didn't seem like I wanted to accept what you were sharing with me and the ideas, it was it was invaluable to me because I couldn't make a change at that point and return to my home life that I was dealing with and let down my barriers for that brief hour or 2 hours." He said, "But I utilized it, and over time," he said, "I just remember your kindness." He said, "There were not many people that were consistently kind to me in that manner." And he said, "And I always remember that." And so you never quite know if it's believing in someone, even if they can't immediately make the change, or if it's the smile, the resource, or what that they'll take with them.
Right. You don't know what they're going to walk away with after they meet you.
No. And so really, as we were sharing here, building that relationship is key. In any profession, but particularly in ours, to believe in people and give them that support, and letting them know that you believe that they can accomplish whatever they want.
I often end up saying, going back to the conversations at the kitchen table or in the living room, that I meet some of the nicest people who have lots of problems, but I meet some of the nicest people under difficult circumstances. And when that relationship develops, they often let you know that you've helped them make a difference. So that works for us.
Yes.
I love collaborating and working together on teams. The public school setting definitely offers that opportunity, and especially when the goal of that is to improve the quality of life for someone. Since I started my career way back when, I won't tell you how long ago that exactly was, I keep this folder in my office, and it's labeled, "Why did I become a social worker?" with a big question mark. Because I feel like we have to remind ourselves, because it is so challenging at times. And it's just filled with photographs of students that I worked with, families that I worked with, and thank you letters and notes from those individuals. And it just reminds me of why I got into this field. And when I receive those letters, it's always a surprise. It's always from somebody that I would least expect it. Again, because going along with what Pam said, you never know if you're making a difference, but when you receive something like that after the fact, and sometimes a while after the fact, it makes you realize that your work is important, and it does make a difference for children and families.
Okay.
What comes to mind immediately for me is several years ago I ran a group at one of my middle schools, and it was a very challenging group for lots of reasons, and I really enjoyed working with this group of students, although they definitely gave me a run for my money. The group was supposed to be just a 6-week group, but every few weeks, as we would approach the 6-week time and I would start to talk about, well, we need to talk about what ending this group means, they would say, "Please don't end the group. Please continue on with our group." And because of this particular group of students and their particular group of needs, I made the decision, along with the administration of that school, to continue, and we actually continued that group right until they all graduated at the end of 8th grade. And then they invited me to come to their 8th grade dance, and it was an interesting experience for me. Well, fast forward 5 years, and I had the opportunity to have some interactions with one of the young ladies that was in the group. And I was clear that she was struggling with some things at the time, and I wanted to find out from her, how did things turn out? How are you doing? Because she looked phenomenal, and she was very close to graduating at that point and reaching her goals that she had shared with me way back as an 8th grader. And she said to me that day, and I was completely taken aback by this, "You're the only reason I came to school." So I think along the lines of what my colleagues have said here this morning, you don't know what impact you might be having
Exactly.
on a child or a family. You may never know. But for her to put that out there for me and to share that with me was huge. And I'm hanging on to that.
Okay. It seems as though mental health issues have increasingly come to the forefront for families, for celebrities. I mean, it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is. We all seem to struggle with that. How does FCPS handle the mental health issues of our students?
Well, one way that Frederick County Public Schools addresses the mental health needs of students is through the Community Agency School Services program, better known by the acronym CASS. We have formalized partnerships with 5 agencies that provide mental health services in Frederick County. And those agencies have therapists on their staff who have the ability to provide direct therapy to students in the school building during the school day. And the role of the CASS coordinator is to sort of manage all of that and make that happen. Currently, our 5 partners are Behavioral Health Partners of Frederick, Brook Lane Health Services of Frederick, Villa Maria of Frederick County, the Frederick County Health Department's Behavioral Health Services Unit. And just about a week ago, our 5th partner, Advanced Counseling, who is a nonprofit affiliate to JSMDPA, joined our partnership. And they are going to be adding, in addition to direct therapy to students, they're going to be adding psychiatric services, assessments, and medication management to be delivered in a school site.
Wow.
We're very excited about that. And they're going to be starting out their services specifically in the Catoctin feeder schools, and as well as the Brunswick feeder schools. So that's one way that Frederick County Public Schools addresses the mental health needs of students and families.
So direct therapy means that students get the services they need right in school. There are no barriers to transportation, for parents being able to change their schedules. You are able to meet their needs right where they come every day.
Yeah, this provides one option for families, and it becomes a very important option when it's a family with those barriers to accessing therapy outside in the community. Whether it's transportation, they just don't have a way to get there. They work long hours, they work out of town, and they just don't have the time.
Right.
Or they have multiple children with needs, and it's just difficult to manage all of their children. So it's an important option for them.
That's phenomenal.
What's also important to note is, just to build on what Karina has shared, they're all nonprofits. They went through a request for proposal process, so anyone that was a nonprofit could apply, to be considered for this partnership. And Frederick County Public Schools does not benefit from this partnership in any financial manner, which I think is really important.
It's cost neutral.
It's
which is
cost
great.
neutral, exactly. And it's really a relationship between the family and the agency. We benefit because we're getting a support for the student
Right.
that they may not get, and they're coming into the classroom, more prepared to learn, as we say, which is the goal of our CASS program.
Now, you mentioned some of your mental health partners. Who are some of the other partners in the community that help serve the needs of our students?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier that we're really fortunate in Frederick County. We have a wealth of good community resources here, and so we do interact with a lot of community partners in addition to the mental health piece. We every year we try to make sure that kids who are in need of school supplies have the needed school supplies. Kristen talked about that earlier. So all of us went into different communities to make sure that those local groups, in Middletown, it's Middletown Valley People Helping People. I think in Walkersville, it's Glade Valley Community Services. Each community, Urbana has one as well. We interact with them to try to make sure that those services are being available, that school supplies are available to kids in those communities. So we work closely with them. There are many churches that participate in that process.
Okay.
One in particular is Evangelical United Church of Christ. Barbara Kirshner-Daniel is one of our partners. She coordinates the school supply drive for the Religious Coalition, which covers 3 city feeder districts. So that is a huge one that takes place every summer. The other organizations that we work with, Religious Coalition is a big partner with us. We have so many families now who are experiencing eviction, foreclosure. Sometimes they don't have the money to pay for their Medicaid. They might be taking their paycheck to pay for their rent, and so they can't afford their prescriptions. So we work very closely with Nick Brown over there. We've developed these relationships over the years, and it helps because it helps us get families connected more quickly. So we have a great community resource group here, and that's a lot of what we do is interact with them.
Right, that's awesome.
We also have an informal partnership with the Girl Scouts. They actually recruit volunteers, so we are able to offer a relationship building group for girls, for young ladies at the middle school level. They call it Be a Friend First. So we're really fortunate to have that partnership as well.
Are there any other partnerships you can think of?
I think, we always, for meals, the rescue mission does a tremendous job providing breakfast and lunch to our families, as well as an area to go and get some groceries as well. They have a thrift shop, so we send lots of folks there. Community Action also has, their shelter and a food bank as well, and some health services. And so we're just, they're all, I don't know if we'd call them partners, but they're our first stop. Where every family, we make sure that they know the basic resources that they can access here in our community.
And because we've been doing this since 1992, informal partnership in the sense that we know some of the people who run those organizations. So sometimes when you have just a really unique situation, you can pick up the phone and call somebody in that agency who you maybe worked with for the last 10 or 15 years and say, hey, is there some way we can help this particular person? It's a little unique and situation. And because CASS has been around a long time, it has a reputation, usually we can brainstorm together and come up with solutions. So that feels good.
These are agencies and organizations around the county
Department
that
of Social Services.
complement our mission.
Right.
They want what's best for families as well, for individuals. The Seton Center is another great example up in the Emmitsburg area for Thurmont families and Emmitsburg families. There's just a wealth of agencies out there for support that work very well with us.
It's really the reason. It's the reason CASS was created. Really, when I hear you talking about that, and we do need to give Dave Marco credit because it was his idea. Kristen talked about that history, but one of the things that grew out of that first interagency board of directors was an interagency release of information, which was really very unique at the time. These days, collaboration is a word everybody uses, but in 1992, there wasn't a lot of collaboration going on. We all were working with families, but because of confidentiality, we weren't necessarily communicating. And Dave just said, that's crazy. We're all in the business of trying to support families and kids. We need to come up with a way to make sure that we protect people's confidentiality, but that we can communicate, because together we're going to be so much more effective than alone. And so that release of information went all the way to the Attorney General's office. It was approved, and we use it to this day. And so many of the agencies that we work with are on that release, and with the parents' permission, we can communicate. And I think we provide better service as a result.
I'm going to piggyback on a couple, other great places are Beacon. Is in the Brunswick area. It's an emergency fund support network for families there. And I think in many of our schools we have, the Frederick County Public Schools has established relationships to have Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, the after-school programs, before and after-school programs, which are wonderful. And oftentimes they'll work with us on scholarshiping our families in.
Oh, good.
So we're grateful on so many levels. I mean, I believe Frederick County Public Schools does a tremendous job at supporting families on every level. They're committed to the community.
Great. I have one other question for you. And you mentioned when CASS was started, I'm sure that some of the challenges then are consistent today, but would you say that homelessness is of the same level now as it was then, or have you seen a tremendous spike in homelessness for our students?
Tremendous spike, I would say. When we started Pam and I started in 1994, and I think probably the number one request for help back then was, can you help me figure out how to get my child connected to counseling and stuff, and that still is a big one. But the housing situation has become huge, and we get many, many calls from people who are behind in their rent because they've lost their job, their house is going to be foreclosed. And although we do have some agencies here in Frederick County that are trying to help, everybody really is overwhelmed with the lack of affordable housing. And of course that has to do with the economic stress that families are experiencing. So that's a big challenge for us today. No easy answers. That's one when you're sitting at the kitchen table. It's difficult to be able to sort through.
And those are also the hard ones. We were saying what comprises of a hard day. That Friday afternoon when you're so excited about the weekend coming and you get that call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that says, we have nowhere to be today. Or, we have no house, we have nowhere to live. And you're like, So, you know, we support and send folks to Religious Coalition at that point. We make calls. The community, again, has, we have a homeless coordinator here in Frederick County Public Schools as well. Kathy Cullen, who's done a beautiful job building those relationships as well. But
And
those,
SHIP?
and SHIP, Student Homeless Initiative Program, is wonderful. They're another community partner that supports kids that are in a homeless situation.
I think, Tiana, in looking back over the past 20 years with CASS and our work, particularly with respect to homeless families, I would say in my first 5 to 10 years in this job, I rarely came across a family that was truly homeless, and I was able to invest a large amount of time into helping get them stabilized. I think where we saw the homelessness problem really start to emerge was with the real estate crisis, the escalation of housing prices, people getting into mortgages that brought them in over their heads. So for a long time, the homelessness problem was more of people who had always struggled and were always sort of paycheck to paycheck. I think what we saw more recently was an economic crisis, a national economic crisis that brought families who had been self-sufficient for their whole history suddenly into a situation where mortgages were not manageable. And we were dealing with a whole different type of homelessness problem at that point. And I think the four of us have really tried very hard to be creative, to help with initiatives like SHIP, to embrace our homeless coordinator here in the county, and to do everything possible, including initiating emergency relief funds in various areas of the county, and working with agencies to be very creative in patching gaps, getting people into different agencies like Advocates for the Homeless, and eventually get them into permanent housing. And I think each of us have had some cases where somebody was actually on the street, so to speak, and by working with various partners, first maybe a motel, then maybe placement at Advocates, and eventually I know I personally have had several clients who got into permanent housing, and I even have one client of whom I'm extremely proud because she bought her own home 2 years ago.
That's awesome.
It's all about collaboration.
I was going to say, we
We
need to
can't do it alone. No agency can do it alone, and so that's what makes, you know, success for families and students.
Exactly.
We need to put a shout out to all the people that make our job possible, because we link families. We are supporting the families to utilize those services, and our families would not be able to make the steps to changing their lives without the support of the community. So shout out to all of our community informal and formal partners.
And in spite of having all these great partners, you all put in a lot of effort, and you do a lot to serve the needs of our students and our families and our communities. And we'd like to thank you so much for all the work that you four dynamic women do to meet the needs of our students and to make sure that our students come to school prepared to learn. Thank you so much for joining me on FCPS All-Stars. I'm so pleased and proud to have you all join me today. And thank you for joining us as well. Stay tuned for our next episode of FCPS All-Stars. And in the meantime, don't forget to shine on.